Hello guys, how is everyone doing this evening? We've been busy today. There's been a lot going on, and honestly, there's still quite a bit going on. This coming weekend, there's going to be a lot going on, but we wanted to get at least a stream out to you guys just because of the movement that is happening in Bitcoin, kind of give you some perspective, some things to look for. So this evening, what we really want to focus on is addressing where Bitcoin is at right now, why it's doing what it's doing, and kind of some ideas on forecasting the future. So what we should be looking for the future for Bitcoin, and where we can look for setups and to take profit, but also not get caught up in the FOMO and the nonsense. So we will be talking, we're going to focus on Bitcoin. I'm going to go through, we'll see how much time we have, but I'm going to go through my Forex watch list at the end. We'll try to do a little bit of Q&A, but we're going to try and keep this to about an hour and a half max. So we're going to jump right into this in 2 minutes. So I'm going to just give it a couple minutes for people to get ready. I'm going to get my charts ready, and we're going to jump right into charting. All right. So while I am getting my charts set here, what are you guys looking at? What are you seeing as far as Bitcoin? Are you anticipating this is the bounce to move higher? What are you looking at? What's your anticipation for Bitcoin? I'm curious to see what you guys are thinking. The stream will be available on YouTube afterwards. Sometimes it takes a few hours, but it will be available. All right, continuation patterns. Temporary bounce. Another move lower. Seeing short-term bounce, and we're going lower. Forming bull flag for continuation. A bull flag would be on the move up. We don't really have enough on the hourly to see if that is a bull flag, but it is potential. It's something to look at. We will look at that in a minute. Bottom and bull run, looking for a bounce. All right. So interesting ideas you guys have. We're going to go over a couple of those. We're going to look at some things here. As far as the ETF goes, the ETF is not going to happen until the market is regulated correctly. So there's really no chance of an ETF happening. And honestly, I think an ETF really is not what Bitcoin needs. Honestly, I don't really see that as a big issue to me, but all right. So I'm going to jump into my charts here. Just give me a minute. All right. Okay, so there's my chart. You should see that in a moment. We're going to start off here on the weekly. I know some people will do the monthly chart, but honestly, for Bitcoin, because of the drastic move to the upside, monthly doesn't really tell us much. Over time, that's going to change, but the weekly is enough for us to get a picture. So, what we're looking at on the weekly, to give a little bit of perspective, this was a descending wedge. Descending triangle pattern. People have different terms. It doesn't really matter. It's the same thing. It means the same thing. What happened though is it broke to the upside. Now, a lot of you would be expecting to see a descending pattern like this, a descending channel of this type, to break to the upside. So you'd have to ask the question, well, why didn't it break to the upside? Or is our pattern just wrong, and do we need to just adjust it? So there's a couple questions that we need answers for. And these are good questions to ask yourself. If you're charting, like you'd have it like this, that'd be 3 touches, that'd be good for now. As it adapts, do we adjust it out to here, or do we just assume that it's a break of the pattern? So it's a good thing to keep an eye on. All right, so this is the weekly pattern. If you notice on the weekly, we do have technically, we could say 1, 2, 3 significant touches. It's not the clearest form, it's not the best form, but this does give us a potential for a bounce area. Okay, so it is something that we have to look at. If we jump down to the daily here, this is what it looks like. Let me fix this. If we do that, but we have to keep in mind that although we can count this as a second touch, it doesn't touch. So it is possible that we get a little bit of a bounce, and then when we come back and we get an actual third touch or fourth touch of this pattern. So it's something we have to consider. As we break this down farther, we will see a little bit more clearly where the market is at. So I will get to the reason why Bitcoin is dropping in a moment, so bear with me as I go through this. All right, so 4 hour. As we break this down to 4 hour, this is important that we understand kind of the structure, okay? So from this pattern, we have this impulsive move, okay? This would be the corrective, and then the impulse. But you'll notice that we kind of get this corrective move and impulse, and then it just kind of corrects out like this. So this is a very, not much has happened, right? So from August until November, we kind of stuck in this sideways movement. And then suddenly we just drop out. And not only do we drop out, we literally lose, you know, not quite 50%, but very close to the value of Bitcoin. Now, that's a significant amount of loss in a move from a sideways pattern. It's not something you usually see out of a sideways pattern. So, to answer the question, getting back to the question is, why did Bitcoin crash? There are several reasons why it is in a crash. It is important to understand, though, that the patterns have been telling us this. This is something that we have been predicting for quite a while now. It's something that we have been saying that we have not hit a bottom, even though since August until around November 13th, 14th, people were saying that 6,000 was the bottom. That's the lowest Bitcoin would go. But the patterns were not saying that. The structure was not saying that. The structure was saying that we needed to move lower, that we were going to move lower. So it's important to understand that markets do move in patterns, and we can understand where the market will go long term based on these patterns. That's crucial for you to understand. When you can understand that, then when you can break it down, we can forecast these things long time in advance. That being said, the question we have to ask ourselves, is this purely just the market fluctuating, buyers and sellers having, you know, competing for price, or is it also related to the manipulation that we've talked about in past videos and streams in the market, things like Tether and Bitfinex? And this is something I want to address very briefly here. This plays a role in what is happening with Bitcoin. Even though we've been able to forecast it with the patterns, the actual sustained sell pressure is partially due, and a great deal due, to the fact that Bitfinex, Tether, and Kraken are under suspicion and have recently, Kraken's recently been subpoenaed for information in regards to the Bitcoin manipulation or possible manipulation of price movement to 20,000. As soon as the news was released that there was a probe into Bitfinex and Tether, price began to drop. What's interesting is not only did price begin to drop, but large amounts of Bitcoin have been consistently been moving out of Bitfinex. They've been selling off Bitcoin. Now, at least that's my assumption what they're doing with it. I can't prove that they're selling it, but what are they doing with it? So that's a concern for the price. So there's a couple of things that we could surmise. We could surmise that whales are scared and starting to sell off. Whale Group, Whale Pool, things like that are selling off Bitcoin, and that's pushing the price down. Bitfinex may be selling off, maybe excess scamming. I don't know. So there's those possibilities. There's a lot of things we don't know, but we do know that there's a lot of sell pressure going on. And suddenly, you look at the volume, and the volume suddenly goes from nothing happening to, you know, millions in volume. Bitcoin, you know, the volume just spikes ridiculously, and it's all sell volume. It's all sell pressure. So I'm not saying that this doesn't happen in a normal market, because if you look at Forex pairs, they do have big moves like this that happen. But when you know certain facts about what's going on with Tether and Bitfinex, then you have to ask the question, is there more going on behind the scenes? So we have to prepare ourselves, and I guess that's what I'm trying to say is be careful, because you might take something as a bounce and you might be, buy in and then not be prepared for more sustained sell pressure, because we're still dealing with manipulation in the market not being regulated properly. So those are things to really pay attention to. Let's look at the 1 hour quickly here, and I want to show you a pattern that I know some of you are looking at in the Slack group. I've noticed a little bit. Actually, I'm going to switch to BitMEX here for a moment just to show you this. And then I'm going to go back to Bitstamp. But this is the pattern that I know some of you are looking at. It's a totally valid pattern. So it's a descending nature coming from an impulse. The important thing to keep in mind for these is, because of this type of impulse, and because it came from an impulse correction, so impulse correction, impulse, we're expecting that this should be a correction to still move lower. So we need to keep that in mind, that yes, there could be some upside still. This could move to the upside, but is it still short term? So this type of pattern, a descending nature coming from an impulse, especially of this size, if it moves up from this size, we would expect to see something like this. It would complete the pattern. It wouldn't have to be an impulse. It could, be very corrective in nature. But it would complete this pattern. This would then turn into a flag. It would turn into a ascending nature, and we'd still see this sell. So that's a pattern that could happen. If we move to this upside, that is something that could happen. We could see a longer term, a bounce to move a little bit higher before continuing the sell pressure lower. The deciding factor, I think, on whether we continue lower now or we get that bounce. I mean, we've already had a little bit of bounce, but I mean that move higher. I think the deciding factor is whether we are eminently on the edge of Tether getting seized. Bitfinex being seized, that type of thing. If that was to happen, I do think that we are going to see some panic selling take place, and I think we're going to continue lower very fast. So that's something to look and keep in mind. Now, it's important that we still look at the chart as it is. So we keep in mind what's going on with Tether. We keep in mind what's going on with Bitfinex and the manipulation that's going on with those. And BitMEX is playing games too. But at the end of the day, we still can look at these patterns and we can say, well, have they been accurate? And they really have. I mean, you look at this. That was a flag. We got the sell from the flag. it was a very good sell. I mean, that was a very good setup. I know some of you were shorting that. If we look at the pattern that turned into the sell, we do get a lot more corrective nature coming out of it, which we need to keep note of. But it does sell. So descending, it does sell. No. I'm getting back to my chart here. Now, so that's something to keep in mind, the possibility that this can break down. Now, you will notice that we have several candles forming here. Somebody mentioned a possible bull flag. I believe this is what they meant. So impulse, corrective. If we kind of get this moving sideways like this to create that flag, if we get a touch at the top, another touch at the bottom, and then it bounces off from that touch, it would be a good entry point. Okay, so that would be something to look at. If that happens, then be careful, because you could get that buy that takes us back up to fulfill this pattern. Maybe even we continue a little higher, or we could just move back up to retest this trend line and then come back down. Because for the amount of selling that has happened, for us to bounce from this area and just move up to 10,000 without retesting this 3,400 area is really unlikely. I mean, it's ridiculously unlikely for that to happen. So the most likely scenario is still to see, it retests this bottom. Even if, like I said, even if this is a bull flag and we move up, we fulfill this pattern, or we develop a larger ascending nature, we will see this come back to the downside, I believe, to retest that 3,400. It just makes sense based on how patterns work. So wait for the pattern to develop. Wait for it to develop. This does look like it could be a bull flag, but it's not developed enough to prove that. Now, that doesn't mean it can't go right now. It could. But these are very risky to just take, If this was 3 touches, and if you look at my Bitstamp one here, this is more of a developed channel. It's a little larger channel. We do have that overall scoop. I like these because you have these scoops. 1, 2. I'm going to count this as a 3rd touch just as an observation point, even though it doesn't actually make this bottom. I'm going to count it because it is how I have my larger channel. But that being said, again, it doesn't mean that we can't get a short-term, move to the upside. This could move out like this, and we could still get that sell and continue. That could just be developing a larger flag. And I think this is the important point. I know that a lot of people, they start learning our method of trading, and it clicks and it makes total sense, and it's like, wow, I can actually see what the market's doing. The problem is sometimes I see that there kind of gets a disconnect where people will see one pattern. For instance, you could see this as an impulse, this as a bear flag, and that as continuation to move lower. That's totally valid. It's something to look at as a possible setup. But to just look at that as the impulse, just look at this as the correction, and not see this descending nature and see the possibility that this could move to the upside, is ignoring the possibilities of the market. So in the market, there are probabilities. There's the most probable outcome. That's the one we usually talk about when we do videos. We'll say this is most probable. Then there's possibilities. So there's the possibility that this, we have 3 touches there. This could just break down from here. There's no reason why that can't happen. If it does, it could give us that double bottom. If we get a bounce off from that double bottom, that would be a good entry in my book. That would be a really good entry in my book, because as this double bottom, it's going to at least most likely give you an opportunity to get into profit and get to break even that type of setup. So that type of a setup is really, really good. But there's one other thing I want to mention on this. The descending nature, we have a descending nature of this, which we would expect to move to the upside. The top of this pattern is either here, 5,600, or right around 6,400. That being said, again, the deciding thing, or not the deciding, but the possibility at the end is if you have another pattern forming at the end. This is a very corrective, ascending nature. If you see that at the end of a pattern, it can overturn the nature of the pattern to move to the downside. Then we just see this pattern fulfill later on. That's usually how it happens. It develops into a bigger pattern. So don't let these type of things throw you off. Keep a note that this is very corrective. It does have 2 touches on the bottom. It does have 3 touches on the top. Keep an eye on this, how it pans out. So if we get that corrective movement like this, and then it moves to the upside, there would be a buy in that. If, however, we either correct like this, it's going to be a sell, because that's still just a corrective nature, or we could just drop down from here. I would prefer to see us break the trend line correctively and then drop. That would give us a clearer indication that we are dropping. But again, right now we're seeing sustained sell pressure because there's a lot of Bitcoin being sold. A lot of people are trying to move Bitcoin. There are a lot of people are scared. So the other thing too, like Johnny, the thing with these is if you're looking at the possibility of it being a bull flag, is if it turns out to be and you missed, you missed it. It just went without you. Usually once you get the impulse, especially where we are right now, you're going to get that continuation pattern, and then you can get in on that. So if this is turning around, we are going to get an indication of that. We are going to get that signal that it is going to sustained move upwards. It's not going to just go, up to 8,000 from here. I mean, that's extremely, extremely unlikely. You would have to see a lot of money poured into buying Bitcoin, a lot of strength poured in. And we didn't even see that. It wasn't like at 3,400. We saw a ton of money pouring in to buy Bitcoin. It didn't happen. So if that type of scenario was to happen, we'd want to see that double bottom and, then see people come in and buy Bitcoin. But there's a lot of uncertainty because you have all the news, basically like CNBC, the nonsense money channels that know nothing, basically saying that 6,000 was the bottom, that was it. To see most of the people believing that either 5,000 or 6,000 was the bottom, and suddenly we are at 3,000 level, people don't know whether to buy. They don't know if it's continuing. They don't know, so they're waiting. So that's why we're seeing this type of hesitation in the market to see whether it continues lower. So that gives us an idea. Yeah, be careful with leverage. I definitely would be especially on BitMEX. They can cut you up and spit you out even if you know exactly what's going on in the market. So be very careful with that. So this is what's going on with Bitcoin. If you look on the 15-minute chart, it is kind of interesting. I don't really recommend that you take a trade based off from this, but you basically have almost 3 touches, almost a triple bottom. On the top, you have that. It does look an awful lot like what you'd want to see in the flag. Again, a 15-minute chart on Bitcoin, it's not really the best idea. But if you're just watching to see, kind of hone your edge, watch and see if this, if we start to see a move up from here, within the next, hour or so, it would be kind of interesting to see if that happens. But right. No, I understood what you were saying, Johnny. I was just giving my opinion as well. you want to look at the 1 hour. 4 hour, it's not going to, especially Bitcoin, you're not going to get the entry if you are trading it. That being said, if you're waiting for the best possible entry, you can trade just the 4 hour. That would be fine if that's what you're doing. That would be fine. But as far as trying to catch, the better moves or try to enter on a flag, you're going to want to do that on the 1 hour. So, yeah, definitely not 15-minute. Don't go that low. It's going to get you in trouble. But I just thought that was interesting. If you see that on the 15-minute and then you see it happen on the 1 hour, it gives you a lot more possibility that's what's going to play out. Right. No, I get what you're saying, Pro Clubs. I get it. It is very volatile. You have to be very careful. I totally get it. Volume profile indicator is interesting because it gives you a visual representation of where price action has heavily been in the past. The problem with it is it's really hard to use long term. So for instance, if I'm looking at the 1 hour or the 4 hour charts, I'm not going to be able to zoom out far enough to see, back before 2018 when we were at those levels. So I'd have to go to like the daily chart to be able to zoom out to that. I don't really think that it is something that I would use in my trading strategy, but it is interesting. So if you were to look at it on the chart, you will notice that certain areas like this that are very impulsive, often you will see that in the past there hasn't been, the volume in those areas is smaller. So it's like these are areas where there hasn't been a lot of concentrated buying and selling. So if you were to look at a setup, and then once you're in that setup, you use the volume profile for indication of areas where it might start to retrace, I don't see a problem with that. It can be valuable, I think, in that respect. I wouldn't trade based on it, though, because it's not an indicator I trade based off. But it can be interesting to kind of get an idea of past historical volume in a visual sense. So you will notice that I don't really use it. I think I've used it once or twice in a video, but yeah, if you see value in it and you can use it for that, that's how I would use it. I wouldn't pay attention to RSI because when you've seen Bitcoin moving in a very horizontal, constant, corrective manner, and then suddenly we tank almost 50%, RSI is worthless. It's worthless. It's going to confuse you. It's going to give you false setups. People are going to say, well, we're at 4 RSI, we're oversold. We have to bounce. Well, you might see a small bounce and people start to buy in, and then we just continue lower. So RSI can be, this is statistically proven, it can be a good indicator to trade based on in trending markets. But when you have something like this going on in Bitcoin, it's going to really screw you up. So as far as I'm concerned, I would remove it from your chart, at least for now, at least for Bitcoin. It's going to be crazy. So the one thing we have to keep in mind for where we are at with Bitcoin right now is that at some point here, if we do not, like for instance, if over the next few days we start to move correctively, either sideways or a little ascending, we're going to start to see more bullishness in the news, in the YouTube channels. Be careful of that. Pay attention to the chart and what's happening on the chart and ignore what people are saying, because what could happen, like I mentioned before, we could move back up to 4,800, 5,000, maybe possibly even 6,000 in a manner, in a ascending channel or something of that nature that is still a sell setup. So it doesn't mean you can't buy on the way up. It just means that you should be paying attention to what the chart is saying so you understand that, let's say you bought in at 3,700 or 3,800 and at 6,000, you're in good profit, right? But what if it suddenly turns around and tanks on you? You need to know that that's going to happen. The only way to know that's going to happen is if you pay attention to the chart. So, keep an eye on that. I don't use volume as an indicator at all. I do find it interesting that, like I said, recently, I'll put it back up on the chart quickly here. I do find it interesting that in these dumps, you're seeing the high volume. You're not seeing the high volume from the buyers. You're seeing it on sells. So you're not seeing a bullish move to push price higher. You're seeing a very sustained sell pressure. That's where this can be beneficial. When you see these drastic differences in volume. When you're in correction, low volume, suddenly in the sells, people are just dumping. So that's where it can be valuable. If you look in the past, we had instances like this. That was a tether pump there. What's interesting to me is it does appear that the charts are becoming clearer and clearer. We're seeing things like this. This channel is really, really clean. Like, the touches are clean. It's almost parallel. It's just really, really clean. You have the descending within the descending. That's why those two things as the reason why I do believe that we will see a move up. Possibly. It is something I'm looking at as a possibility. I just want to get confirmation of it. So if you're not in a trade right now with Bitcoin, I would wait for confirmation to move to do that. If you had been looking at this as a bounce, that would have been the time to buy, obviously. In hindsight, you could say that. But also, the other reason why you could say that is because of that large retrace candle. So it retraces all the way up, and, it would have been a possibility for an entry as a lower risk. It wasn't the best setup either. I'm just saying that if, you could have taken a gamble on that one. As far as 1,000, Bitcoin could go to 1,000, but if it does, we're going to get confirmation on the way down. The only way we're just going to see a straight sell is if Bitfinex and Tether get seized. Then we're going to see panic selling, and we might see a straight sell where literally it's just red candles for a while. That is a possibility, but we don't know when that will happen. I do believe it's going to happen soon. Long term with Bitcoin, I guess until Bitfinex is out of the way, I don't see Bitcoin being able to have sustained bullish movement up. So a sustained real, like we saw last year running into 2018. I don't see us being able to have that kind of movement with Bitcoin until we deal with the elephant in the room. If Bitfinex gets seized, Kraken probably will too, because the reason is it's the only USD Tether pair, real USD Tether pair. And so my opinion is they're probably money laundering through Kraken. That's my opinion. I could be totally off the wall, but there's a lot of substantial evidence, I think, that would substantiate that. So that's my opinion. So that's kind of what we're looking at for Bitcoin again. Keep an eye on the possibility for this to break to the upside, either to fulfill a bear flag to continue lower, or to fulfill this pattern, move to the top, and then we would turn around. So there is the possibility that we will see that bounce, but also it's very possible we will just continue to sell from here, this being the impulse, this being the correction. We could still continue to sell this. If we do that, people might say, well, then your patterns are invalidated. Well, what's going to happen is the chart is going to show us what's really going on. If we get that sell, we may just sell to the bottom of this trend line, 3,000 area, and then move to the upside, 2,900, 3,000 area. Or this pattern could develop out bigger. We'd get a bigger, larger descending nature and maybe possibly move into 2,000 range. Could we go to 1,000 is totally possible. We don't need to talk about that yet. What we need to look at is where we're at now, and that's what we're doing. So that's kind of my overview of what I think Bitcoin is doing. And I believe if we look in the past here, we can see there's a lot of reason to trust what the chart has been showing. When will the sell period end? That is really a hard thing to say for yet. If you look past 2,900, that area would be a good area for reversal, I believe, if we were going to get a reversal. You also have 1,800, and then the next area is 1,500, and then 900. So those are areas, just general areas, based on where people are going to look at as support. That's what the crypto world is going to look at as support. If that's something you want to look at. The important point to really focus on, though, is the pattern. So we have this pattern. We didn't really get that touch here. So it does come back down. Again, it is totally possible to see this move back down and then move up. So we're not, again, I guess why I keep going over this is that we're not really bearish. It's just when we've traded so long using, this method, it's like these are things that consistently happen. So if we go over the possibilities and we understand this is what could happen, these are the options, and then we see confirmation of one of these options, then it's like, okay, I can enter this trade. And I can be relatively confident that this trade is going to pay off for me. And that's what makes a difference. That's what makes the difference between being a profitable trader and just basically being gambling. So, as far as a bottom for Bitcoin, I don't really believe in bottoms. I think markets move based on patterns, and we could bounce from 3,000, move up to 8,000, then come back down, go to 1,000. It's based on what the pattern tells us. So as far as what chart to use, Bitstamp is probably the most reliable pair. It has the most legit volume. Coinbase, I don't believe that they are actively manipulating the market, but Bitfinex does trade on the Coinbase platform with their bots. So sometimes you'll see wash trading happening on Coinbase. It's Bitfinex playing around. And you'll notice I do use BitMEX because I've noticed that BitMEX will sometimes move the market, especially when they liquidate, a lot of shorts. All right. So that's Bitcoin. Let's look at XRP really quickly, and then I'm going to move into Forex pairs that I'm looking at for this week, and then if we have Q&A, we'll do that as well. So we talked about in the last live stream, this descending channel, it did break to the upside. We did get that flag. Let's look at this on the 1 hour. Be a little bit more clear. All right, here we go. So again, we had this flag pattern. it did have the 3 touches. That was an extremely good entry because of the 3 touch pattern. Then you'll notice it had this hover, which we've talked about in the past. We talked about it in the course as well. That hover pattern, and then it takes off. And then we don't really get the really nice confirmed flags. We just get the short-term slow. You know, it slows down short-term, and then it continues to move up. So that was a really good entry. Any of you got in on that, that would have been a good entry. Now what we're looking at is this descending large flag type pattern to see if this plays out to the upside. So this is something that I'm looking at. We do have 2 touches right now. What I would like to see happen is either a move to the upside and then to come back down and retest, or we just get a short-term corrective move, because this could be seen as the impulse, and then this to sell. Whether it sells all the way down there or sells to the trend line and then we get the buy, I don't really care. I just want to be watching this pair. I believe it's a huge possibility, we move back down into the 20 to 25 cent range, I'm definitely going to be picking some up unless we are in sustained sell pressure where I believe it's going to go lower. I do believe that's a good range. I'm going to be looking at picking up more. If you're in a trade on Ripple right now because of this triple bottom, that would have been a good entry for you. This does appear to be forming a flag. I would wait a few hours to see if this confirms, and then you could get an entry on that. If you are in, I would set take profits so you don't get taken out if suddenly, or you don't lose if suddenly we do move to the downside because of a Bitcoin move. Just something to look at. If Bitfinex gets seized, your Tether is going to be worthless because Bitfinex owns Tether. Tether is only valuable because of its believed peg to the dollar. So if Bitfinex is under suspicion, there's not really money behind it, you won't be able to redeem your Tether for real money, so Tether will be worthless. If that happens, most likely you'll see Tether go for a premium. So people are expecting Tether to drop to pennies, which is possible. It is possible, just like BitConnect, but it's also possible to see Tether suddenly move to, $2, $3, $10, or $100 even, because it isn't really worth $1. There's not money behind it. But if you can't redeem it, it doesn't really matter. So I wouldn't hold Tether right now. I think it's very dangerous. That's my personal opinion. And that's the thing. I was busy most of the day, and I was focusing on Forex, so I did not notice that they printed Tether today, so thanks for mentioning that. I was going to check, and I never did. That's actually interesting, because that could be why we have this impulse. So you have to keep that in mind. If this is just a Tether pump, then we still could come to the downside. So keep that in mind. It's kind of interesting. All right. I'm going to go into Forex pairs right now, and then we'll go into Q&A. And if you have some, pairs you want me to look at, then we have time, we'll do that. But people were, I don't want to say complaining, but people were, some people live in areas of the world where it's midnight, 3 o'clock, and, they want us to get to Forex as well. So we're going to go into Forex, and then we'll come back and I'll answer your questions as well. Okay, so this is what I was looking at. First of all, let's look at the weekly on the DXY. This is the US dollar index. If you're new to Forex, or you're not even really interested, I would encourage you to just hang around and watch this. And if after you're done watching, it's just like, I'm not really interested in Forex, it's not something I want to trade, that's cool, But give it a shot, because you might start to really love it. And if you like trading Bitcoin, but you're really not sure what Bitcoin is doing, Forex is something you can really learn on because it's established markets, it's regulated, it's really easy to trade. So I would encourage you just to give it a shot if you're not in it. And a lot of you I know are trading it, so that's why we're doing this for you. So we have this overall ascending nature for the DXY. It's been gaining momentum, or I don't want to really say momentum, but it's been overall gaining strength since 2008. Obviously, we've had these dips. But since 2014, we've seen a really lot of strength coming into the dollar. The question is, are we going to move to the downside? What are the patterns telling us? And this is the important thing. So we have this impulse that turns into lower momentum ascending nature. And this is the pattern we were looking at here. So looking on the daily gives us a little bit more clarity. What does it look like to you? If you look at this, this looks like the impulse correction to move lower, right? So this would be just a flag. That's basically what I'm looking at. The reason why we're not looking at, and what's important to understand here is that when we're looking at the weekly and the daily, these things take time to play out. So within that larger cell, there are the buys. So what can happen here, you have this impulse. It moves up correctively. We could see something like that happen as well. So again, we talk about probabilities and possibilities. We aren't here yet. Okay, so we can forecast the possibilities of what can happen. And then as things progress, we can say, okay, this is developing. This is definitely what's going to happen next. But if you only look at one option, you say, well, ascending, I'm just looking at cells. I'm just looking at cells. I will not look at anything but cells. What if the market suddenly, not suddenly, but over time, you get a different pattern? Now, it's important to be open-minded and understand all the possibilities of the market. So that's the daily. If you look at the 4-hour, the only reason why retail is at a disadvantage when trading Forex is because most people who trade Forex in retail trade based on indicators. They trade based on news. And if you do, then yeah, it's a sucker's game because you're trading based on what, the leftovers, if you will. It's not the good stuff. If you learn what the market is, how the market moves, then you know what it's going to happen next, and you don't have to worry about that. Okay. So this is what I'm looking at for the 4-hour. You have this overall ascending corrective nature. The possibilities here, and I don't know why let me just go back. I'm actually going to, all right. So let's take this off. So here's the possibilities. If, which it looks like it's impulsing here, but I just drew this on before. If this corrects out like this, you get a flag. Then you say, okay, we're seeing some upside here. It may be short term, but it is going to be upside. We did have that very impulsive move. Impulse, correction, impulse. If this was corrective, then we definitely could get in on that and get some short-term buy. However, just because we're seeing the impulse to the upside doesn't mean that this is just going to move indefinitely to the upside. We could just get a double top, or we could break that double top, and then we could get the move to the downside to fulfill this ascending nature. And when that happens, this is going to be the sell. If we get in on a sell, let's see, we can get in, if we can, let's be conservative and say, 30 to 35 pips. That's a 12% trade still. So that's the type of trade that we want to be prepared for when it happens. And if you look at the 1 hour, so descending nature, you do have the impulse, you do have this descending within a descending at the channel line, all from an impulse. It gives high probability that we will come out of this impulsively, and we do. The question is, how long will this be sustained? That's what we have to consider. We do have 4 touches. So this pattern is fulfilled. We don't even have to go to this top level. And this is why I was showing you on the higher level, this could be this pattern. So impulse, correction, the move lower from here. This could happen. It doesn't have to go to the top. It could. It could double top here. It could break that high with mass psychology and then come to the bottom, which would be an awesome sell. But it could go from here. So if, and here's what you'd want to look for, if this just moves correctively like this, either kind of sideways or ascending, I would be looking for an entry point. If we see this get a nice reversal candle, you could look at an entry there. This right now, just draw this out for you guys. You have kind of that pattern. It's a small, ascending, very corrective nature. Something's going to happen soon. And if this is going to move to the upside, it could go from here. But it also, we could get that move down and then get the form that flag. So I guess why I like setting entries for the top of patterns like this is because if I get a reversal candle on this, and it turns out it's just reversing a short term to continue up as a flag, I'm still going to be in that sell for profit. I'm not going to take a loss on it. But if this is the sell, and I got in on that reversal candle, which it isn't, there isn't one, but if there was, and this is the sell, then I got in on a good point where it's going to be the highest profit. So that's what I'm looking at for US dollar. US dollar is going to sell. It's not a question of if. It's a question of, will it sell from here? Do we get that retrace? Do we get that reversal here to confirm this as a bear flag? Or do we move to double top or break that top and then go? But it's going to sell. And when DXY sells, Euro USD is going to be a big buy. So kind of the flip or the inverse of the DXY, we're looking at this as the possibility of impulse, this as the correction to move higher. Okay, so if DXY is selling, then Euro USD is going to move to the upside. It's just how it works. The question again, the flip of the DXY is, do we get, does this form a flag and then move a little bit lower before it goes? Or do we get a corrective nature like this and then it drops before it goes and gives a third touch? Or do we just kind of correct like this and then go? So those are kind of what I'm looking at. Again, I will often when we do these streams, I'll draw things like that. I'm not saying that that's the only way it can look. I'm just giving you an idea. If I say it can correct like this, I don't want you to look on the chart and say, okay, he said 1.13050 down that point, the 28th of November. I'm just giving you an idea of what it would look like. You guys have to pay attention to the market as it develops to see, is it correcting along the trend line? If it is, look for an entry. Look for a reversal entry and try to get in on it. So Euro USD is moving to the upside. It's going to happen. So you're going to want to keep an eye on that. it's just paying attention. This is going to develop here over the next day. I would really pay attention to that. I'm not really sure what you're talking about where we get ahead of ourselves. I know that sometimes when I'm talking, I can get ahead of what I'm saying, if that's what you're talking about, but I really don't know what you're talking about. All right. So that's basically what I'm looking at for Euro USD. This is going to be a really good trade. So if we do end up getting this to come back down in a double bottom, test this area again. I really don't know why that's off. That should be over here. But if we do get that, obviously the XY is going to mirror that, and it's going to be a great sell. But if we get that, most likely, this is going to move back up, and then we're going to get that flag pattern. So most likely that would be how it fulfills. It doesn't have to. It could go from here. But most likely, if we're going to move down before moving back up, most likely we are going to get that flag pattern. All right. So I'm going to show you my watch list. Not my watch list. Yeah, my weekly list. My watch list is just everything. So my weekly watch list for the week. This is what I'm looking at on British Pound USD. So similar to Euro USD, but British Pound moves on its own. Sometimes it'll move much faster than Euro. Sometimes it moves much slower. It does inevitably fulfill most of the time the same type of patterns, but they don't move in conjunction. Tom, we used to be on BitMEX. We used to trade on BitMEX, but we both decided to quit because we were telling people not to trade on BitMEX. It was unethical for us to trade on and tell people not to because it is a risky platform. So this is the impulse. We do get this corrective nature as we are dropping, but it does still move lower. Then it turns into this corrective flag. So the most logical, most probable scenario is that this is going to drop. It's going to move to the downside. Again, the question is still, do we see this move to the upside first? So if we drop down to the 1 hour, we look at the patterns that are developing. This is kind of the options that I'm looking at. So if this forms a flag, we could get that short-term sell. Then it bounces and moves to the upside. That's a possibility. We also could see this just correct like this. Move down, and then we could get that bounce. That's a possibility as well. What would be the most likely scenario? So looking at the 4 hour here, we do have this overall, I'm looking at as a bear flag, possibility of bear flag. We have impulse, we have a correction, we have the impulse, then it turns into very corrective. What's interesting to me is that while we have this impulse, this right here is very corrective. So this I would look at as the impulse, just this whole area. I would expect there is a possibility for this to confirm the pattern. It doesn't have to continue, lower than the trend line. Although it could just drop from there. But I would expect it to fulfill that pattern. What's interesting is if we're looking at this as the impulse, this as the big bear flag, to see this at the end of the pattern, it's kind of like a mini of the big pattern. So a mini bear flag of the big bear flag. Usually, I can't say that every single time, but usually it increases the probability of the bigger pattern playing out. So I am looking at the possibility of getting an entry on this. If I see very corrective nature, a flag like this, hover pattern, I'm going to get in on that. If it, for whatever reason, just drops from here, I'm going to wait for a flag and I'm going to get in on the flag. But this is setting up nicely, I believe, and I'm going to be watching this. This is one of my pairs. I do believe that this could take several days. It may not. It may develop quicker, but it is the type of pattern that could move back up to the upside and then go. So we do have to be patient with it. It may not be a pattern that's going to play out right away. But that's kind of what I'm looking at. But again, I really pay attention to the fact that this pattern mimics this bigger pattern. So that means something to me. Euro CAD, these are all 6 of these are the ones that I'm looking at for the week. So it doesn't mean that there aren't other trades, and it doesn't mean I'm not going to take other trades, but these are just my favorite. Okay. So this is an interesting pair because if we look at the daily, we have a bigger ascending channel that we know eventually, I don't know why, but for some reason now TradingView, my trend lines, it's been happening quite a bit lately. They just move on their own. Like, it looks like I'm just sloppy, but let's see. Let me get that. Okay. Anyways, so descending, this is going to sell, but that's on the daily. We have to look at the lower time frames to see what's happening right now. Right now, again, this is a similar pattern. We're seeing this as the impulse. Is it possible that this moves to the upside because it's descending? Or is it going to go from here? If we look at the last part of this pattern, let's look at it on the hourly. It'll give you a little more clarity. We have impulse, correction, impulse, correction. I know, sloppy drawing, but impulse. The logical conclusion of this pattern is this to be another correction to complete this pattern. That's the logical. That's the most likely scenario. So, let me get rid of all this junk. All right, so it could develop out like this to the trend line, then drop. We could get that third touch. That would be a perfect entry. It could move correctively, break the trend line, and then we get that sell. So either way, I do see this as completing the pattern. I do believe it will complete the pattern. So I'm looking for an entry on this. I would prefer it to move back to the upside, get a retrace there, and get in on that there. But EuroCAD, this is one that I'm really going to be paying attention to because I do believe that I can get a couple percent out of it. So that's what I'm looking at. The interesting thing about this pattern is it is ascending, so we could complete this, move back up, or we could sell from here. So that's another reason why if I can get in on a trade on a flag here and it does just drop out, instead of this just being let me show you. So let me see here. If this moves back up, it's going to likely be around there. I can probably get in around 25 pips. To the trend line is 4%. If this continues, I could get 10%, almost 10%, 9% out of the trade. And nobody knows that that can't happen. So the short-term trade, you know, the possibility here could turn into a nice big trade. So that's why I guess when you're trading, some of these trades you might be like, well, there's 2 to 3% to the trend line, but if it's the trade that fulfills this whole pattern here, it moves down to test this. It could happen, then you're in the trade, you're gonna bank it. So that'd be nice. Long term, if this continues descending nature, we will get that buy. So again, it's important not to get biased on buy or sell. It's just important to realize that there are so many opportunities that we need to take advantage of them and not worry about which side they're on. All right, so British pound Aussie. This is similar to Euro CAD in that we have this descending movement, and we do have this nice impulse. It is looking very corrective. Again, I am paying attention to this last part. It's impulsive, but very corrective. So if this plays out, we could see this move to the upside to double top or fulfill this, trend line pattern and then sell. Again, this trade is, this is another one of those trades that if we get in at a double top area, we're going to get in right around 25 to 30 pips. It really depends if you can get that tight. You need to pay attention to what the market is doing. If you have to get in at a tighter one, go 40, do it. It's still 4%. To the bottom of the pattern is 8%. To the previous low is 13%. So when you look at that, waiting for these setups, it's worth it. Forecasting these setups, it's worth it. And again, if this drops out from here, it will form a flag and we can get in on the flag. But this is possible this will play out. We get that either third touch here and then it sells, or we move up to double top. Either one of those, we got to pay attention to those. Look for reversals, look for entry points. But that's going to be a nice setup. Things like this, is it possible that a bull flag like this could be the one that takes us, back up to here? It is possible, but it's not going to happen without confirmation. So we're going to get a confirmation flag. So I would not take this expecting this to be a big buy. If it does break, we're going to get a confirmation flag you can get in on. So that is something I would keep in mind. All right, so New Zealand, USD, Kiwi, USD. Looking at it on the daily, we are in overall this larger pattern, but focusing in on this smaller descending pattern, we will fulfill this pattern. Again, we can take advantage of all the buys and sells up to the top. But it's important to understand where we are at in the pattern. So if I'm on the hourly and I'm looking at a buy, and I also notice that I have 3 touches on the daily, on the bigger pattern, it takes the probability to the next level. It just increases it exponentially. So that's why we pay attention to the higher time frames. We have this overall move up. So once we get that reversal, we get the very impulsive moves. You got the flag. We do have this impulse, and the flag is deeper. It does correct much deeper. So if you had gotten in here, you would be coming close to break even. But then we get this more corrective impulse that turns into a bigger corrective flag. So what I'm looking at here, and I'm actually in this trade right now. This is a trade that I did jump in on. You'll notice this green, this first impulse, this first retrace. It retraced over half of that very bearish candle. So that to me was a good entry. I am paying attention to the nature of the market as it moves. I don't mind if it moves correctively like this. Yes, I could get taken out for 1%, but if it continues very low momentum correctively, I'm happy to stay in the position because most likely it's still going to break to the upside. If, however, this corrects like this, then I'm going to pay attention to the trade. I'm probably going to move it to break even when I can, because I'm going to see the possibility it could move down, would take out my position if I don't have break even, and then still it could move to the upside. So I am in on the trade. It is moving in profit. It is moving slowly. It is a Sunday. I'm not really expecting a large push right now, but I'm paying attention. It does have that overall descending, low momentum corrective nature. In a descending, within a descending, I'm looking for this to move to the upside. So looking at the possibility for this pattern, there is about 4 to 5% in it for where I'm at, but that's what I'm looking at for this pattern. This one and also USD Swiss are patterns that I'm really expecting to play out really quickly. Be careful, don't just jump in on them, but these could play out overnight, tonight, or tomorrow. You'll notice on this one, and this was beautiful. If you got in these trades, these were beautiful trades. This flag, this was an awesome trade. It was probably, I don't know, probably my favorite for the month. This was a really nice move. But once we got that break, and it's like I tell you, you probably wouldn't have gotten in on this trade, but once you got this impulse confirmed, you have this confirmation, you can get in on that. This was a beautiful trade. So we have that impulse, bigger correction. We're still expecting this to sell. This is very corrective in nature. We do have now, it's going to be that third touch. It's going to be a double top. If we get that retrace, I'm taking this trade. So you'll notice I do have this on the chart. I haven't taken the trade yet. I was going to on this retrace, but it almost turned into doji. And because of that, I was expecting it to form and come back up. So I am looking at an entry on this hopefully tonight. Hopefully it develops here tonight. If I can get that retrace, I'm definitely going to jump on this one. Could it develop bigger? It could. It could continue to move like this for a little bit. It's unlikely, I think. It also could drop down, and then it could move back up, and then I would take a break even or a small profit on it. But these are the type of trades that usually, if you can get in on them at the top, if they do turn into something bigger, if they develop something bigger and it's just like they're just developing out, usually you can take at least at minimum break even, sometimes 0.5, 1%, or 1.5%. So they're usually decent trades. Yeah, this is definitely one of my favorite starting the week. But that's what I'm looking at for USD Swiss. I don't trade a lot of the Swiss pairs. This is one I do trade, and it is one that when you get nice moves, you get nice moves. Like, you look at some of the Swiss pairs and you'll see that it's very wicky a lot of times and very corrective. This can be true of Swiss, but when they go, oftentimes you'll get some really nice moves. So I don't trade Swiss all the time, but when the setups are nice, I really like getting in on them. So it's kind of something to pay attention to. I'd be careful of trading like Mexican peso against the Swiss or something like that. So the lesser known currencies are the lesser, not known, but lesser, I guess, not as stable, in my opinion. They tend to be, but USD Swiss is one that I do pay attention to. Another thing I wanted to mention, and I forgot when I was talking about Bitcoin, was I've been paying attention to Kraken USDT or Tether to the dollar. I can't really say that you can forecast and predict based on it, but it does line up. You see these dips, and it does appear to me that they correlate fairly nicely, usually with dumps. So when you see the price of Tether tanking down to 95 or 94 cents, it's something interesting to keep an eye on. Again, I wouldn't trade based on something like this, but it doesn't hurt to keep an eye on it. If suddenly you look at this chart and it's trading at 50 cents or $5, you know something's really weird. So that would be something to look at. Looking at Bitcoin again here, we do have, let me just draw this like this. We do have that. If it retraces from here, we could see that formation of that flag we were talking about earlier. So again, keep an eye on this. If it continues lower, most likely it's going to drop and fulfill this as a flag. So keep an eye on that. All right. So those are the Forex pairs I'm looking at. That's kind of what I'm looking at for Bitcoin. If you have questions, we'll take some questions here for a few minutes. Again, I'm not going to keep this stream going too much longer because I know some of you stay up late. But if you have questions, drop them in the chat and I will try to answer any questions you may have. It's important to look at when you're charting, to go back and look at your chart and see, what I was looking at, was it what actually happened? Or were my trend lines off? And if they were off, was it something I should have noticed? For instance, you can make adjustments like this post, the movement in hindsight. But is that something you would have done before? No, it isn't, because this is the first touch, that's the second touch. By then, it's not confirmed. It's a descending nature. You wouldn't have taken that sell, would you have? So this would have been the logical. That's 3 touches. That would have been the logical trend line. And this is where it sells. That's where the movement happens. So this was the correct trend line. Sometimes people will move their trend lines afterwards and they'll be like, man, that was a nice trade. But where you put the trend line afterwards, is it really where you would have seen it before? And if the answer is no, then you wouldn't have taken that trade anyways. So it's important to be honest with yourself and understand that. You can move trend lines around a lot, but what's important is the trend line confirmed? Like this one. This is 3 touches. It makes this more likely that this pattern will fulfill. So the reason why it's crashing is because the pattern, it's fulfilling it's been fulfilling the impulse correction pattern that we talk about in the course, and it's been fulfilling the larger pattern, which let me show you. So this larger pattern here, we expect these type of patterns, if they're confirmed, if they're what the chart is respecting, we expect to see 3 touches. So we have 3 touches on the top now, basically. We would expect to see it at least retest that bottom. Again, another reason why Tether's crashing is because of the volatility with Bitfinex and Tether being, in my opinion, scams, and also being probed and subpoenaed by U.S. law enforcement. So we are seeing Bitfinex selling, most likely seems to be selling Bitcoin. I doubt they're hoarding it as Bitcoin is dropping. So they're moving large quantities of Bitcoin. I'm quite confident they are selling it off the counter. So that seems to happen. It does appear whales are selling off. That's one reason why, to see a reversal, if we're going to see a sustained reversal, we're going to see that in the patterns. It's going to show us that. So yesterday's impulse, how do you handle and manage short? Okay. So if you're trading on BitMEX, it's going to be difficult because BitMEX does wash trades to try to kill off profiteers. They don't want people to profit. So they do purposely kill off traders. That being said, how would you manage it? Okay, so let's say you're talking about this trade. Let's say we got in on this here. All right, so looking at the chart, this candle right here was very impulsive. It completely retraced this previous candle. That is a good sign that something might be shifting. If you had stayed in after that and then you start to see this descending nature, because we already had that retrace candle, when you see this complete retrace candle here, the wick, it just completely retraces. That would be the time where I would have gotten out of this trade. I probably would have flipped the trade to a buy because that, to me, would have been a good setup for a buy. It depends, you know, how risky you are, but that could have been a potential good setup. Again, if the volatility, if during the hour this is just moving up and down like this, it might be hard to get a buy on that. But you do have that descending nature, huge retrace candle, and then it's verified, in my opinion, by this. It usually means, at least short term, you're going to get that move up, which happens. If you've gotten in on this trade, you're probably at break even or a little less. You shouldn't have taken a loss on this trade. You should at least have a order set, a limit order set, a stop order set to take you out so you don't take a loss once you're that far in profit. It doesn't make sense to not. On this, what you could have done on a trade like this is rather than close it, you could have moved the stop loss, which it's not going to allow us to do it here. You can actually do it on TradingView, but I'll just use the take profit here. We want it would you'd move the stop loss, not take profit, but you could move the stop loss to just above that, and then you could have waited and got taken out. Again, that would have been around 1%. I would have gotten out on this retrace. Probably it would have gotten you right around 2.3, something like that. So that's kind of how I'd manage it. That gives you a general idea. If, however, you had stayed in this trade till now, I probably wouldn't be exiting the trade at this time. If you'd stayed in, I probably would be hoping this confirms and gets moved to downside and you can take your profit. But that's kind of how I'd probably handle it. I do use limit orders and stop orders at times. I also use market orders. It depends on what I'm doing. It's hard to explain it. It depends on the trade. A lot of times I just wait for the retrace on the hourly, and I'll just do a market order and market order on the retrace and get in on the trade. If, however, it's a pair that's volatile and it seems to me there's a huge potential for that to retrace, I might, instead of doing a market order on the retrace, I might set a limit or stop just above or below it to get tagged in if that impulse continues. So it really depends on the trade. I know that kind of sounds a little ambiguous, but it's really hard for me to explain the type of trades. It's basically, it depends on the volatility of that pair at the time and whether I see it as a high probability trade or a lower probability trade. You know, but I do utilize both. Usually that's not going to make or break you. It's more of a fine-tuning. If the spreads are lower, market orders are fine. If the spread is like 10, you know, if you're dealing with, especially with Forex, if you're dealing with Forex and Euro USD right now is 1.4 and it's like 10 pips or 11 pips, and you do a market order, you're going to most likely enter that market order 10 pips away from where you wanted to be. So you're going to be 10 pips in the loss. So you're going to have to move 10 pips into profit just to be a break even. So understand that. That can be a good reason to try to use a stop or limit order. Yeah, don't ever make a single trade, especially Bitcoin, without a stop in place. You're going to get in trouble if you don't. A falling wedge or descending triangle, as far as I'm concerned, descending patterns, we still look for them to move to the upside. It's just understanding if the pattern fulfills, then it's going to go. You can have, again, as we talked about earlier, you can have a pattern that looks like a descending pattern, and then it turns out it was just a bear flag. So you get that the last move is a move to the upside to confirm, you know, and so it turns out it's not, you know. For instance, you have this, you could say this is impulsive. This is descending nature. But if this moved to the upside like this, well, it would be like that. That would be the bear flag. That would be the bull flag. I was trying to explain, because I said bear flag before. I was trying to explain bear flag and a bull flag. It didn't work too well. So this could be the impulse. This could be the correction. But before we got to this area, we were seeing this as ascending. We were seeing this as a sell. But as it develops out, this was what I was trying to explain. This turns into an actual, it looks like a flag. That's what it's looking like. So even though originally before this was here, and I guess I could just do replay, we would be seeing this as just ascending nature for a sell. So hopefully that made more sense than it sounded like. I'm still trading Bitcoin and crypto. I'm going to be buying more XRP at certain levels. I'm just actively trading Forex. I'm looking for setups on Bitcoin and crypto. So I'm not trading crypto every day. There's not setups every day. So I'm going to take the good setups when they come, but I'm also being very careful and very accurate in my entries with crypto right now. Will Bitcoin die forever? Many people on YouTube saying if Bitcoin drops 1,000, then it's all over Bitcoin. Please share your thoughts. I hear that, and there's some people I respect on Twitter that are saying that Bitcoin is dead. It will die if it trades, you know, below 1,000. I'm not sure I really believe that. You have to understand a couple things. First of all, what is the value of Bitcoin? We don't really know, because the value right now is inflated based on fake money. So we have to find the true value of Bitcoin. Then we have to see if professional traders, smart money, wants to treat Bitcoin and cryptocurrency like currencies like Euro and USD and Aussie. If they do, and they're picked up by Forex exchanges and brokers, then I don't think that it's going to die. I think it's going to become even better. For instance, and I'm going to say this, and I know somebody's going to take it wrong and go crazy, but I would almost prefer Bitcoin to trade in dollars rather than thousands. You can make a lot more money trading Bitcoin in dollars than in thousands. And there's, in my opinion, a lot more opportunity. If you buy Bitcoin at 4,000 and it goes up to 8,000, you make $4,000 if you're just trading one-on-one. You double. If you buy Bitcoin at 8,000, it has to go to 16,000 for you to double. So you understand that you have a huge amount of risk in capital to make you know, small moves aren't going to make you money. So in my opinion, if it was trading in dollars, I think it'd be better. Maybe hundreds would be okay. But I think long term, we don't really know if it's going to stick. Maybe something else will replace Bitcoin. Maybe XRP will become what Bitcoin was supposed to be. Maybe another cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrencies are here to stay. Over my lifetime, at some point, cryptocurrencies are going to take over the monetary currencies of the world. It's going to happen. It's just how long will it take to happen? We don't know. How would I, okay, on Bitcoin, how would I look at the current pattern for an entry, I think is what the question is. I wouldn't recommend using the 15-minute chart. I did show you guys it because I thought it was interesting. It does look very interesting and clean, but I wouldn't trade off from it. I wouldn't recommend you trade off from it. I've done it on BitMEX. That's how I traded. But I also have more experience behind me than most of you guys. And I don't say that to be prideful or whatever. I'm just saying that, you know, I can take riskier trades and understand the risk and know when to get out. And whereas if I was to tell you guys to do that, you might get in deep water. So I wouldn't recommend the 15-minute trade. Right now, there's not an entry on Bitcoin, in my opinion. If this moves up and then moves back down and then we get a retrace, that's an entry. I would take that. It doesn't mean it has to fulfill and go crazy, but it would be a valid entry. Right now, it's not really a valid entry. I'm trying to find the questions and it keeps moving on me. How do I decide which pairs to focus on? Also, any tips about how to choose your broker? Okay, that's a good question, Tom. So for Forex, every week I try to go through on Sunday. I try to go through all the major pairs. And if I have time, I go through all the pairs. If I don't have time, then usually on Monday I'll get to the other Forex pairs, the lesser pairs. I'll go through the pairs, I'll look at the weekly, I'll look at the daily, and if we're setting up for reversals in those areas, they become higher on my watch list. I look on the 4-hour and the 1-hour. If we're looking at really good setups, if we have 3 touches on the hourly on a descending or an ascending channel, then it becomes a priority for me. There's a lot of pairs that have trades that are possible that will play out this week that are not on my list that I will take advantage of. But the reason I'm not taking advantage of them, I mean, the reason why they're not in my watch list, my weekly watch list, is because maybe they're in the middle of the pattern. They're definitely not the best setup. So I usually choose 5-6 pairs. That's what I stick to for my watch list. It doesn't mean that's all I look at. It just means that if my week is really busy, I'm traveling, I'm flying, then I may not look at the other pairs. I already got it forecast. I know there's going to be little gains here and there. But I'm traveling. I don't have a lot of time. I'll focus on those pairs. I'll be like, okay, USD Swiss, it's setting up for a sell. I'm going to get in on this. I'm going to be ready for this. So it helps me focus. And when I don't have a lot of time to put in, I can still capitalize on the big movements in Forex while I'm on vacation or I'm traveling or whatever the case may be. Yeah, I agree. Most of the coins in crypto are garbage. Good morning to Vietnam. Glad to have you with us. Thanks for joining the broadcast. The 15-minute on Bitcoin looks like the United States. Interesting observation. Interesting. I didn't notice that, but okay. All right, I'm going to give this a couple more minutes. If you still have questions that didn't get answered, if I missed one, feel free to drop it in the chat and I will get to it. And just, again, pay attention to what we mentioned as the possibilities. Just to clarify for Bitcoin, I do believe we're going to see more downside again, as I mentioned before. We at least should retest the 34, 3,500 area. This area somewhere in here, even if this was the bounce area. It really doesn't make sense to have this sustained sell pressure and then suddenly you just have this little bounce and then suddenly it goes. That doesn't make sense. Would I recommend one-time short on BitMEX rather than Tether? If you're going to trade on a risky platform, I would trade on BitMEX all day long over Bitfinex. BitMEX trades against their users, so they're crooked. But other than that, and other than the fact that they wash trade, I think you're more likely to make money on BitMEX and you're more likely to be able to get it out. If you are on Bitfinex, I would highly discourage you from withdrawing USD. I would encourage you to withdraw your Bitcoin. If you want USD, withdraw your Bitcoin, sell it on Bitstamp or on Coinbase, and then withdraw. There are hundreds of people who are trying to get their money out of Bitfinex who can't. So if you're trying to get a withdrawal from Bitfinex, you're going to possibly be in trouble. Nazir, I hope that's how you pronounce your name. You can't legally leverage trade Bitcoin in New York. You can do it on Kraken and BitMEX if you use a proxy, which is what I did when I was trading on BitMEX. I used a proxy in a country that BitMEX supported. BitMEX really doesn't care. They're just protecting their butt. So they really don't care. As long as you maintain that proxy, you use that when you trade, you're probably not going to have issue. Probably not. It is a little risky, but you probably won't have issue. So if you want to trade on BitMEX, that would be how you do it. But be careful of trading any broker that allows trading in New York for Bitcoin because it's not legal. And they could get shut down for it. Does XRP have a better future than other cryptos? I actually honestly believe it possibly does. It does have utility. It is being utilized. It is at a value that it does have, in my opinion, room to grow. If you invested $1,000, I'm not telling you to do that, but if you were to invest $1,000 into XRP and, you know, it goes up a couple dollars, the return for that move relative to a return on a move similar with Bitcoin is going to be exponential. So $1,000 in Bitcoin, you'd have to be a very large move to get the same amount of return, I guess is what I'm saying. So I do believe it has more value. It is one of the crypto that I'm considering long-term holding. That will be based on whether or not exchanges get seized and stuff like that. So I am paying attention to that. But it is one that right now I am really interested in long-term. All right. Will you start to look at crypto like Cardano or anyone in the future? We can look at some other crypto in the next live stream. I can do that for you. Digitex, you won't be able to trade in the US as far as I know. I know in New York you can't trade with them. So I couldn't even sign up for their beta. Deribit is the same thing. I can't sign up for them because I'm in New York. New York really does suck. We have politicians that are retarded and make dumb laws that really screw over the population. And these are people from, yeah, it's sad, but it is true. The politics in New York are kind of bad. William, that is a good point to note. I guess the point is, if we're focusing on patterns and we're paying attention to how the chart is moving, if we get a sign of a reversal, a move to the upside, a good move to the upside for XRP, and I invest in it, then if things start to turn around and move the other direction, I can sell. So, you know, my ambition could be a long-term hold, but I'm not going to lose all my profits either. So if I got 500% gains, I'm not going to let that go back to break even. It's not going to happen. I don't use a 3-day chart. I don't really see where it's necessary. It just adds another chart to look at that I don't really need. The weekly, the daily, the hourly, and the 4-hour are all you really need. Most exchanges are risky. Bitstamp is probably the most legit exchange for cryptocurrency. They consistently provide real audits. They prove that they're legit. They do not allow wash trading. They've actively stopped wash trading. I'm not saying it never happens, but they do make attempts to stop it. Coinbase has had wash trading. That's why I really don't like that, but they do seem legit as well. I don't think they're crooked as per se. Coinbase seems like a decent exchange to use. I've used it. So Bitstamp, Coinbase, Bittrex possibly. I would avoid Kraken, BitMEX, and Bitfinex. If you're going to leverage trade a risky, do BitMEX, but you can't short on Bitstamp, no. Binance, I think they're crooked too, but yeah, maybe not as crooked as Bitfinex. You have to watch the stream over again this year because we covered that, you know, probably 40 minutes of Bitcoin. But I do believe that we will retest the 3,500 area before we, you know, if we're going to confirm that we're moving up. I heard about BitMEX. It looked a little, I don't know, fishy to me. I don't know. I need to look into it more. I don't know anything about it. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap this up. I do appreciate each one of you guys joining us. I hope that this was beneficial to you. I hope you learned something today. I would encourage you to check out our website. There is a link to our course in the description. Go ahead and look at that if it's something you're interested in doing. If you are interested in trading Forex and you are new to Forex and you have questions, feel free to shoot us a message on our website. We are happy to answer your questions. We don't have any interest here other than educating. So if you want to learn how to trade, we want to help you to learn how to trade. If this is just casual to you, you just want to casually trade Bitcoin, that's totally fine. We don't have a problem with that. We don't have any interest in trying to get you into anything else. But because of the struggles we went through in learning to trade and all the nonsense and all the false, you know, theories and strategies, we really do enjoy teaching. We really do enjoy seeing the potential in our students. Some of you guys in Slack have shared some of the trades you're taking and the progress you're making. And even those of you who are still not profitable, maybe you're having break-even months, you're improving, and I'm seeing the improvement, and it excites us because, one, I've been there, and I know what it's like to struggle and to get to break even and feel like I'm never going to make it. And then to start to see those consistent profitable months and be like, hey, I actually can do this. This is something, this actually can work. I don't have to lose money in trading every month. And once you get to that point and you look back, you're gonna be like, man alive, it was worth those weeks and months I put into it. It was really worth it. It's not easy. It's never going to be easy. If it was easy, everyone would do it. But there's people who go to school for 8 or 12 years to get a degree, to have a career. Are you willing to put in months, maybe a year or two, to be able to trade really profitably and really well? So that's my pep talk for you. If you're maybe discouraged in trading or you've taken a lot of losses with Bitcoin, don't give up on yourself. If this is something you want to do, make it happen. Just really make it happen for yourself, because, you know, if you want it, go get it, I guess is what I'm saying. Kraken is crooked, I believe, because they're the only Tether to USD pair. Not even Bitfinex that owns Tether has a real USD to Tether, Tether to USD pair. We don't do trade signals to our students. We show our students in Slack what we're looking at. We show them trades that we are taking sometimes. We at the beginning of the week, we always show what we're looking at. We show the setups. And when students will ask questions about pairs, we answer them as far as we can and give insight onto the setups and entries that we would recommend. We do not give trade signals, and the reason why is because, number one, we want to make you successful trading for yourself. We don't want you to be dependent on us. We want you to be able to learn this, master it, and do it for yourself without us. And that is something you can do. And number two, we take trades that if we did signals, people would come in late, they would take the trade late, and then they would blame us and not understand. And you're not going to learn anything if we tell you to take certain trades. You need to learn when we post in Slack and we say, hey, I'm looking at Euro USD for a sell, and here's the reasons why. Look for this type of an entry. Then you can learn, because you can look for it yourself. And it makes sense to you, and your mind will develop around that, and you'll understand. So that is why we don't do trade signals. Almost everyone who does trade signals is crooked. It's a scam. I don't really know of anyone that does trade signals that isn't a scam. But that's kind of our philosophy. So, again, we're not trying to sell you anything. If you don't want to buy the course, that's fine. But I do want to encourage you that stick with it, put in the effort, back test, make it happen if this is what you want. So, all right, guys, we're going to close this out. Thanks again so much for watching. Thanks for your time. And it was exciting having you guys, excited to answer your questions. If you are part of the Slack and you do have more questions, feel free to drop them in there. Either write me or Joe personally, and we'll do our best to answer your questions. If you've written me a message and I haven't answered it yet, feel free to drop me a note and say, hey, can you answer this question? And I will do that. Edwin, last month I did a trade recap. There's actually, the video is here on YouTube. It shows the trades I took last month. I explained why I took the trades. I showed the trades where I lost, the break-evens, and the profits. And I was very transparent with that. So, yeah, definitely take a look at that if you haven't yet. It pretty much validates what we preach. And a lot of you have requested it, so that's why we did that. I'll probably continue that, but I may not do it this month or next, just because it's been so hectic. I haven't actually been doing screenshots of my trades this month, most of them. So if I'm going to tell you I took a trade, I want to screenshot it so you can see it. But all right, guys, take care and have a great one. I will try to get a video out to you, or Joe will get a video out to you as Bitcoin progresses. So Have a good evening, everyone.